In fact, Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous atheists in the world, has provided all the evidence we need to see that God exists.
Oh, I am sure that he has, and I'm sure that him being a famous atheist would also make any difference to that fact whatsoever. Just as I am sure this whole video is going to be the world's bestest evidence for the God-man that ever did the do. And that last one isn't technically sarcasm. I mean, if it is all terrible, it is all also the best. Good job in advance, mate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton for crossexamined.org.
Doctor, eh? Well, doesn't that sound very impressive? Until you realise it's all in apologetics and theology. And while I am sure they are perfectly legitimate fields in theory, it always just sounds like, at least when it comes to apologists and theists getting it, well, a bit like getting a degree in confirmation bias. But to be fair, still way more impressive than anything that Kent Hovind has ever achieved.
As a theologian and apologist who often provides a cumulative case for the existence of God,
Of course, the cumulative case for God. Because you see, if you have this thing that doesn't actually prove God exists, and this other thing that doesn't actually prove God exists, and all the rest of the shit that absolutely doesn't prove God exists, well, suddenly, you still haven't in any way, shape, or form proven God exists. Well done. Just as good as those stupid fact things that actually prove the things that they prove, like the losers that they are.
I'm frequently asked to disclose my favorite argument in my repertoire.
I thought this was going to be Richard Dawkins providing the evidence. Oh well. And you know, it's funny that it's quite rare for a scientist to be asked to give their favourite fact about reality that proves XYZ thing is real. I mean, they may very well have one, but favouring something isn't exactly reflective of its utility. And hell, you could like whatever argument you've got to say, mate. And yet it might be utterly incoherent gibberish. Well, I say might.
Out of the couple dozen arguments or so, consider one of my typical top 6 favorite arguments for the existence of God.
Couple, dozen, and 6. I don't know if there's an attempt to baffle by throwing out every single number that you know off by heart, but it is a very strange thing to do. Also, it does make me laugh when this guy's main shtick is to get a big pile of shit ideas together and presumably light them on fire for warmth, therefore God. To then attempt to use just one is a bold strategy to say the very least.
This video will focus on the ontological argument.
Oh god damn it, this is that defining things into existence bullshit. It is literally one of the worst arguments you could have for anything. Seriously, you can't just say this thing is defined as having existence, therefore it must exist. That's not how anything works. Definitions describe things, usually that we already know of, but they never create them, for frig's sake.
Now, there's several forms of the ontological argument, and they usually focus on the idea of the possible existence of a necessary and maximally great being.
Ironically, necessary is not a necessary descriptor, otherwise it is necessary, God does not exist, would be perfectly logically valid, and is also a true fact. Don't at me. Similarly, the idea of something being maximally great is utterly subjective. There is literally nothing you can point to that demonstrates objective greatness. Well, aside from whiskey, obviously. But that's so good that it can't then be used as an example against anything I want to say. It is just that fantastic.
What many consider to be the definition of God.
Many, surprisingly vague number when you were so specific before. And the thing is, many, most, or even all people using a definition of something doesn't magically make that definition any less ridiculous. Everybody on Earth could define me as ugly, unknown, and bad at the sex, but that wouldn't make it any less ridiculous. I mean, it's right there in the thing that I say about myself sometimes. And since I call myself something, that must make it a fact. Facts be damned.
That is to say, is it possible that a necessary and maximally great being exists?
Essentially anything is possible in a let's throw out all these ideas and see if something sticks kind of way. That's like the point of discussion. The problem is when you test those things against reality that it will end up bumping with, well, reality. When you start throwing out terms like necessary being, you kind of sort of maybe need to demonstrate that such a thing exists. Otherwise it's just shit that you're saying to sound smart, with the ironic effect of making you sound quite the opposite.
Or is there some illogical and incoherent notion about a being who exists necessarily?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? While I don't think it's logically consistent or coherent, even if it was, so what? The never-ending parade of theologic gotchas that are simply things that are logically consistent within their own frameworks, but do not work outside of them, is a Venn diagram that I'm pretty sure is just a circle. And that's not me saying that all of them are logically consistent, mind. Oh no. But even the ones that are, don't actually prove shit about reality. And that is where it will always fall flat on its face. If something doesn't describe reality, then in what universe do you expect it to be describing something that is actually real? Not any I know of, and I've been to the whiskey dimension.
And is omnipotent, perfect in power, omniscient, perfect in knowledge, and omnibenevolent, perfect in love.
Well, if it wasn't incoherent before, it is now. Always so wild that theists genuinely seem to think that the more bullshit you add to the definition of God, that somehow makes it more believable and not wildly less so. No, even without the must exist proviso, those things are, in fact, necessarily incompatible with the world as we see it. And throw in the must do the real stuff back in, and it is simply gibberitic nonsense.
The argument usually looks something like this.
Is it a gigantic steaming pile of shit with a bunch of signs saying, "Gob am real because me say so," sticking out of it? No, that's hardly fair. At least steaming piles of shit have actual functional utility, and more importantly, exist in reality, neither of which can be said for this, shit.
Premise 1. It is possible that God, a maximally great being, exists. 2. If it is possible that God exists, then God exists in some possible worlds.
Oh, goddammit, we're only halfway done, and it's already irredeemably stupid. You have mixed up possibility with hypothetically. You essentially have to assume that if you can think it, then it must be true. But anyone who even vaguely understands the concept of a hypothetical would know that it's very much about ideas that more than likely are not true or real or whatever. Again, just because a possibility is hypothetically possible, even if it were actually probable, that does not mean it's actually factual. For example, it's quite likely that if you're watching this video that you are subscribed to my channel, but that doesn't mean it's guaranteed, even though it should be, hint hint. But yeah, it's fantasy world thinking.
3. If God exists in some possible worlds, then God exists in all possible worlds. 4. If God exists in all possible worlds, then God exists in the actual world.
I can't believe this garbage came out of a human being's mouth. No, really, I think you people are the stupidest pieces of shit in the known universe, and I'm still astounded by this utter idiocy. These possible worlds, as far as we're aware, do not exist. And if there is some set of hypothetical possible worlds, that A, doesn't mean that a god would exist in all of them, but more importantly, B, doesn't mean he would exist in any of them. Again, this is just saying things, therefore they must be true with absolutely zero justification. It's actually wild that anyone finds this shit convincing. I'll put it this way. It's possible God does not exist. Therefore, God does not exist. Do you understand how ridiculous you sound now?
5. If God exists in the actual world, then God exists.
He doesn't actually say the last one. Number 6, therefore God exists, because, well, I'm not sure why he even put it there in the first place. It would be as redundant as a self-evident tautology at that point, linguistic pun intended. But you have jumped from absolute hypotheticals to the real world, with no bridge in between them. And you simply cannot do that without real-world examples and or justifications. Otherwise, this is just nothing, which is exactly what it is.
The ontological argument is logically valid and really comes down to the first premise, as the others follow from the rules of modal logic.
Here's the problem, and it feels like a pretty big problem for a guy who claims to have been educated in theology. At no point did you actually seem to define maximal as, well, anything useful, let's say that. You've just said God is maximal, whatever, and then moved on, and presumably did so because you were assuming your conclusion and didn't think you needed to. The closest I think you got was throwing a bunch of stuff on top of being maximal, like the tri-omni stuff, but all you did was actually ask if it was logically consistent with it, not that you were presenting it as the definition of maximal. To me, the closest you got to defining it was as necessary. And again, if maximal is supposed to mean the best version, there's a lot of things in the world that their maximal versions is not existing at all. I mean, have you met people?
So, even if an atheist doesn't think that God probably exists, if one affirms that there is even the smallest of chances that they could be wrong because the concept of God is logically possible, then God exists.
In no uncertain terms, that is the stupidest shit ever. And if you think it isn't, you are the stupidest shit ever. Seriously, the admission of the possibility for something, immediately meaning that that thing has to exist, is the most smug, masturbatory mush in all of apologetics. It is so bad that, again, I'm blown away that you people can't figure out what's wrong with it yourselves. And there is a lot wrong. I mean, let's go on the logically consistent portion of it. Logically consistent worlds exist within science fiction, especially so-called hard sci-fi. If done in an ironically, hypothetically, 100% consistent fashion, they will have a complete universe where everything follows and everything makes sense within the text. But even so, that does not make them even remotely true. And hell, any logically consistent story that also has a necessary being idea within it, well, now it has to be true. And also somehow actually our universe because someone thought it and yada 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 yada. It's beyond parody.
In fact, Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous atheists in the world, has provided all the evidence we need to see that God exists.
Oh hey, it's that bit from the start. Can't wait to find out how this complete horseshit will now become not that, because Richard Dawkins, a famous atheist, don't you know, once said something about something. And that's all the evidence I need. It's wild that these people genuinely think that anyone has reverence for random atheists just because they're well known.
Dawkins has famously proclaimed, "There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life."
Oh, atheismo, damn it, are you serious? Because he said probably, you know, a small amount of intellectual humility. You now genuinely believe that means you get to say, aha, I'm right, and I always will be. Intellectual humility is a good thing, but I guess you wouldn't understand that, because you would need to have an intellect in the first place.
With those words in mind,
listen, my man, you cannot be going around and telling people to do things with their minds, because you'll have to get one of your own in the first place before you can do that.
Here's what I call Richard Dawkins's ontological argument.
Oh, flipping hell, this is going to be something. All right, kids, strap in. He's about to go right down the rabbit hole of dumbassery into the wonderland of the super dipshit.
Premise 1. There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. 2. Therefore, it's possible that God, a maximally great being, exists. 3. If it's possible that God exists, then God exists in some possible worlds. 4. If God exists in some possible worlds, then God exists in all possible worlds. 5. If God exists in all possible worlds, then God exists in the actual world.
Jesus Christ doesn't exist, that was rough. And presumably, my friend, Richard Dawkins wouldn't agree to any of your stupid premises. Probably because they are obviously incredibly and inescapably dumb. But that is a classic theist move. The way I think, the ideas I have, well, everybody, including the people who would disagree with me on a fundamental level, actually agree with everything I say and think, therefore I'm always right and not a stupid potato-brained moron.
6. If God exists in the actual world, then God exists. 7. Therefore, God exists.
He really doesn't know when to stop, does he? Holy hell. And the fact that this was based on, again, someone simply trying to do the scientific thing, that is to say, be open to all possibilities, even those for which there really is no solid evidence. Hence the probably. Yet you can't help yourself but seize on that as some kind of weakness to be exploited for your cause, not realizing all it does is make you look so dishonest that it ends up making me sound positively sober when I'm talking to the officer about how I never touched this stuff.
Thank you, Richard Dawkins.
Christ, you are such a smug piece of shit. Like, I don't even care about Dawkins particularly. Like I said, individual atheists, famous or not, they aren't like the popes and cardinals of atheism, so I really do not care if someone is saying whatever about them. But the fact that this guy thinks he's actually done something, it's just exhausting.
Now, some think that this argument is too easy or too good to be true.
I think it's too shit personally, and if something does seem easy when trying to demonstrate a literal supernatural man, you're almost certainly not just barking up the wrong tree, but almost certainly barking up an entirely different natural construct entirely, like a mountain or a banana.
However, this argument only seems to work with the concept of a maximally great being, as all parodies of this argument have been shown to fail, such as a maximally great pizza.
Oh hey, we finally got to the pizza thing, and apparently the analogy fails. Let me guess, because you decided it fails, because it uses logic to demonstrate that the logic doesn't actually make any sense when applied to the world in any way possible. And because you don't understand that, it means that pizza actually extra super double deluxe proves God. If you ever figure out that your argument is unfalsifiable by definition, at least in your mind, you might start to understand why it's so useless.
Well, couldn't you have a parallel argument for the greatest possible pizza? No, because the notion of the greatest possible pizza is logically incoherent. A greatest possible pizza would be metaphysically necessary in its existence, and therefore it could not be eaten. And therefore it couldn't be a pizza every time it's eaten.
Ew, it's Lowbar Bill. Why would you do this? Haven't I suffered enough, bullshit? But yeah, of course it's definitional word games, not an actual refutation of anything. It assumes that the maximal pizza has to be one that exists, but also ignores the idea that a maximal pizza couldn't be functionally infinite, which would gracefully sidestep the whole quote-unquote problem of edibility, and also ignores that the very notion of maximal is nonsense, because every single concept of the best version of anything is subjective. The best pizza for me is the worst pizza for someone else, and a mid pizza for someone else again, showing that the definition of maximal was the problem the whole time.
Well, that gets my attention and provides further reason to think that a maximally great being, God, really does exist.
Dude, after this video, I can only assume that a set of jangly keys would get your utterly undivided attention and somehow also manage to prove God to you even harder in your tiny little idiot brain. Bye!